Hello and welcome back to St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. My name is Dave Palmer, and thank you for joining me for this journey through the Summa as we learn to come to know God from the Master, the Angelic Doctor, St. Thomas Aquinas. And it's an exciting journey, and I'm glad you're here with me. We are talking about the attributes of God now, and we have already shared 3 of them with you, and we're into our 4th one today. The first was his simplicity. The second one was his perfection, and then remember Thomas kind of paused, briefly to talk about goodness in general, and then he went into the goodness of God, and goodness being the 3rd attribute of God. Today we talk about the 4th attribute of God, and what do you think it is? It is that God is infinite. All right, when you think of infinity, you think about just kind of going on and on forever, and something that isn't locked into one space, but it's a hard concept for us to wrap our minds around because we are in bodies, and we're not infinite in that regard. We may be able to live eternally, but we're not infinite. And so what exactly does infinity mean? Well, in order to kind of grasp this concept, you have to understand matter and form. And I've shown you this graphic before, but I want to review it very quickly because Plato and Aristotle, the 2 great Greek philosophers, had a very different concept of the relationship between matter and form. Matter and form, in Aristotle's opinion, were one. Okay, they're not the same thing exactly, but they are a composite, which means the matter and the form come together in an object. So if you see a dog or a cat or a tree or a flower, the matter and the form are together in a composite, and we're able to abstract the form from the matter. Plato, on the other hand, said that the matter and the form are separate. Okay, so we see the matter and we experience the matter, but the form is in like an ideal, kind of like a perfect idea of the flower or the dog, but they're separate. Okay, and that's very important in this lesson today as we talk about God's infinity for reasons which I'll explain in just a minute. Now, I will warn you, this is a complicated lesson, okay? So hang in there and don't be frustrated if you don't understand it entirely. I don't understand it entirely. I don't think St. Thomas Aquinas understood it entirely. It's complicated, and if you knew God and understood God entirely, you would be God, okay? And you're not God, and so we just try to do the best we can. Thomas asks in question number 7, is God infinite? And he says, now matter is in a way made finite by form, and the form by matter. Matter, the physical aspect of something, indeed is made finite by form, inasmuch as matter, before it receives its form, is in potential to many forms, but on receiving a form, it is terminated by that one. Okay, let me give an example, because I like to show pictures to illustrate the point that Thomas is trying to make. Here you have a lump of clay, okay, and a potter can basically make this into anything that he or she wants. So this clay has the potentiality to be a lot of different things, right? It can be molded into a lot of things. So right now, it's kind of indistinct, but it's going to be made finite by the potter who is going to mold it into the shape of a vase. So now all of a sudden, it's made finite because it's no longer possibly a plate or possibly made into the shape of a dog or a cat, but it has been now specified as a vase, right? So now it's not, the potentiality doesn't exist any longer as to what it could be. Okay, so that's the key here. And again, form. Then he goes on to say, form is made finite by matter, inasmuch as form, considered in itself, is common to many, but when received in matter, the form is determined to this one particular thing. Okay, so imagine bird. Okay, birdness. Okay, that's the form. Okay, so it's the concept of a bird, and every one of us is thinking about a different bird. But let's say that whole form of bird becomes this bird. All right, so now all of a sudden the form or the general idea of a bird becomes very specific. Remember the word suppositum when we talked about a specific creature, okay? Not generally speaking or an abstraction, but a very specific bird, like a bird that you see on a power line or something like that. Okay, because this bird is not the same as this bird or this bird. Okay, there's a lot of different birds out there. So the matter, once it becomes attached to the form, contracts the form a little bit because now it becomes attached to a particular suppositum. And I know this is complicated, but just hang in there, okay? So let's move on. Now matter is perfected by the form by which it is made finite, okay? On the other hand, now and what we're talking about here is this lump of clay that could have become anything was made perfect by becoming something specific, all right? All of a sudden, it's like it lived out its potential, all right? It was in potentiality to a lot of things. All of a sudden, the potter turns it into a vase, and now it knows exactly what it is, all right? So let's move on. On the other hand, form is not made perfect by matter, but rather is contracted by matter, and hence the infinite, regarded on the part of the form not determined by matter, has the nature of something perfect, okay? What this means is that God does not have a body. We learned that before, and I'll show you a graphic here in a moment, okay? Which means that he's not contracted to being just a particular bird like this, all right? You have the form of birdness, and then it becomes contracted because it's this particular bird that form is attached to. Now, being is the most formal of all things, since therefore the divine being is not a being received in anything, but he is his own subsistent being, it is clear that God himself is infinite and perfect. Okay, God is not in a body. Okay, that's the really important part, is that we have learned in this lesson about simplicity, which was 3 qualities or attributes ago, that God does not have a body. God is not composed of matter and form, and this basically gives him greater simplicity, and it also, as we learned today, gives him infinity because he is not limited in space, and he's also not limited in time, which we'll learn about in a little bit, okay? So they tie together, and the interesting thing about all this is that as confusing as this may be, and now that we've done 4 attributes of God, and if it is confusing to you, that means it's sinking in, that God transcends our ability to know him because he is beyond us. Okay, he's supernatural, and that's why the first article of the entire Summa says that whether besides philosophy, any other science is necessary. And yes, we need sacred doctrine because God has to lead us to our final end. All right, I know it's a little complicated, but hang in there. God is infinite. That's what we've learned today. And so now, how does this apply to your everyday life? When you see things in everyday life, like the earthworm, like the flower, like the grasshopper, you should be able to say to yourself, okay, this has matter and form, but this is this grasshopper, this flower, this earthworm. So the form and the matter are kind of limiting because the form is no longer the form of anything, the matter is not in potentiality to everything, but it's now this specific thing. God doesn't have that limitation. God is infinite. God is vast. God has no limitation of being in any particular space because he doesn't have a body, and that's related to his simplicity, okay? I know this is complicated, but hang in there. And thank you again for joining me. This is St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. We're talking about the attributes of God. Tomorrow we'll go into the 5th attribute. If you have any comments or questions, or you want to just kind of open up a discussion about this, leave your comments below. And thank you so much for watching and hanging with me, because it does get easier. Probably, from what I've heard from the students that I've taught, the attributes of God in this first part of the Summa Prima Pars is the most complicated. It does get easier, okay? So if you can weather this storm and survive this, you're going to find that if you hang with this every day and commit 10 minutes to it every day, it will start to make sense, okay? I promise. All right, this is St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. I'm Dave Palmer. Thank you for watching. God bless you.